within any given year, there are around 15 million crimes that are committed. The question is, though, of those 15 million or so crimes that are committed on an annual basis here in the States, can any of them be justified? So I ask you, can we look at a specific crime, any crime, and say, you know what? It's okay that that crime was committed. That person was right in what they did. They were justified in doing what they did. Now, I understand a lot of people's first response is probably automatically going to be no. Crimes cannot be justified. Crimes are crimes for a reason. They're illegal. We should not be doing them. And if I didn't even really put any thought into it, I would probably say no right off the bat. Crimes cannot be justified. But if I stopped and I put a little bit of thought into it, I thought about why the person was committing the crime, what the crime was, and who the person committing it was, I might change my opinion. But you know what? Let's go ahead and put a little bit of thought into it. Let's talk about this for a moment. And maybe we just might come to the conclusion that some crimes actually are justifiable. Now, the first thing that we got to do is clearly understand what a crime is, or at the very least, define what a crime is. So using our wonderful friends at Google, we put in the search engine, what is a crime? The definition that I like that pops up is, very simply put, illegal activities. And that, of course, should be extremely obvious to us, but it gives us a clear definition of what a crime is. Illegal activities. All right. So now that we understand what the definition of crime is, illegal activities, we also need to understand one other important piece of information, and that is, what are the different types of crimes that are actually committed within any given year across our country? Well, our good friends, our beloved friends at the FBI, they keep track of that type of data. With the help of local police stations who send in their crime data every single year to the FBI, they compile that into a list for the entire year. And that list is broken down into 3 different categories. The 3 different categories are violent crime, property crime, and individual offenses. And within those 3 main categories, the FBI further breaks down crime into 61 total different types of crime that are committed across the country within any given year. Those 61 different types of crimes range anywhere from wildlife trafficking to shoplifting, to intimidation, to burglary, arson, and up to more serious crimes that we're not going to mention here for censorship purposes. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth are we even talking about this? Of course, crime is wrong. Of course, crime is bad, especially the ones I just mentioned, so they should never, ever be justified. We respect our laws. There is no excuse for doing illegal activities. After all, we are a nation of law and order, right? So let me tell you why I'm bringing this up. Over the past couple of weeks, many of you have probably seen on social media or somewhere, people have been posting these short little videos simply stating, "I stand with Gypsy Rose." And I saw these videos and I had no idea what they were. I didn't really care what they were, so I didn't pay them any attention. So long story short, one day I'm at work minding my business, just click-clacking away on my computer, and I overhear a couple of my coworkers discussing a bunch of different random topics. But I hear the name Gypsy Rose. They mention it. And I'm like, now I've heard that name before. I've seen those videos where people are posting their little statements talking about they stand with Gypsy Rose. So I'm like, okay, this has to be something somewhat important. If my coworkers are talking about it, I'm hearing about it from different sources now. Now I got to go home and figure out what the heck this all means. So I go home and do a quick Google search. And for those of you out there who are like me, who had no idea what this was, I'm going to give you a quick overview of this whole situation, but I'm going to keep it very brief. All right. So there's this lady by the name of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. I believe that's her full name. If it's not, I do apologize. But anyway, for the past 10 years now, she's been serving time in prison for second-degree murder. And long story short, she got her boyfriend to go and kill her mother. And within just recently, just last December, the end of last December 2023, she was released from prison. And for whatever reason, here in January, probably closer to the beginning of January actually, but it seems like as the month has gone on, her story has gained a lot of attention and attraction from all kinds of different sources. So there's a couple obvious questions here. 1, why did her story become so popular? And 2, maybe the more important question, why did she get her boyfriend to kill her mother? That sounds like a terrible thing to do, obviously, right? Well, apparently, this Gypsy Rose Blanchard's mother was quite the awful person and quite the terrible individual. You see, from a very young age, her mother kept her daughter, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, in her house and convinced her that she had all kinds of terrible medical conditions. She convinced her that she had leukemia, muscular dystrophy. She kept her in a wheelchair, forced her to use a feeding tube. She convinced her that these things were real when they were not real at all. This was a real life situation or case of what we call or know as Munchausen syndrome. And that's a psychological disorder where the parents of or the caregiver of children seek attention or sympathy through the exaggerated or made up illnesses of their kids. And of course, it's not that simple. As you dig deeper into this situation that went down, you find out that not only was she doing all these terrible things to her own daughter, but of course she was beating her. She wasn't feeding her properly. She kept her chained up in the house. And of course, she wasn't going to school, getting an education, or learning to do anything on her own behalf. She was physically being denied the ability to mature and grow as a child. And if that's not bad enough, the cherry on top of this whole situation is that her mother, who made everything up and absolutely abused her daughter, she was using this for financial gain through charitable donations. An absolute all-around horrible person. So again, her daughter is released from prison after 10 years for essentially murder for hire. They called it second-degree murder. And the boyfriend who actually committed the crime of killing the mother is still serving a life sentence to this day. If you want any more information about this case, you can easily Google it and find a ton of information about it. Additionally, if you want to see a sensationalized version of it, which is probably more interesting, you can watch those everywhere as well. HBO has a documentary about it called Mommy, Dead and Dearest. Hulu has a mini-series about it. Lifetime is creating a docu-series about it. So there are plenty of opportunities to find out more information about this. As a matter of fact, there's this great movie I saw maybe 3-4 years ago. It's called Run, and it literally is the retelling of this story. Now, at the time, I had never heard of this Gypsy Rose person or heard of this case. And the movie didn't go out of its way to say, hey, this is based on a true story or anything like that. But it is literally retelling all of those events that happened in real life. The mother, she keeps her daughter locked up at home. She convinces her that she needs a wheelchair, that she has all these medical conditions, so on and so forth. But the movie leans more towards like a horror / thriller type of movie, which I greatly enjoy. And of course, it ends up being the girl just trying to get out and get away from her mother. It's an amazing movie. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's on Hulu. It's called Run. So that's the story. Now, going back to the original question of, can crimes, any crime, be justified? Well, in this case, is that crime justified? Was Gypsy Rose right in doing what she did, getting her boyfriend to kill her mother? Or even if she did it herself, would she have been justified in that? Now, we have all these people who are on social media posting these videos saying, I stand with Gypsy Rose. And in my mind, I see that as a statement of agreement, saying essentially that, yes, you were justified. You were right in doing what you did and committing that crime. Now, don't forget, according to the courts in Missouri, which is where all this took place, she was absolutely not justified or right in committing these crimes. So her and her boyfriend were ultimately punished and punished accordingly. Now, before we say, yes, she was justified or no, she was not justified, we got to stop and we got to put ourselves in that person's shoes. We have to see this from a different perspective. We have to try to see this from her perspective. So imagine you're forced to use a wheelchair even though you don't need one. You're convinced you have to be fed through a feeding tube. You're convinced you have all these medical conditions that you don't really. Leukemia, muscular dystrophy. You're having to take these medications that aren't necessary. You're chained inside your own home. You're beaten. You're malnourished. You're not educated or sent to school. And on top of that, you've been convinced that you're actually younger than what you really are. You don't know your true age. Does that qualify as an excuse to end someone's life? Ask yourself that. Was Gypsy Rose justified in committing that crime? Was she right or was she wrong? For those of you who say that she was justified in committing that crime, that she was right in doing what she did, that her mother deserved that and that she got what she deserved, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who agree with that and understand that. And that makes sense logically. It does. However, there's always going to be those who disagree, who say, no, you can't justify that crime no matter what, especially that type of crime. Murder is unjustifiable. Think about this. Self-defense, right? You see, there are indeed instances of legal justifications for committing a crime. One of those being self-defense. For example, in the state of Texas, Chapter 9 of the Texas Penal Code allows for justification and exclusion of criminal responsibility in certain circumstances. Those circumstances are self-defense, defense of property, and acting out of public duty. Now, could we not make the argument that Gypsy Rose was acting out of self-defense? Additionally, could you not argue that if a person commits a violent crime against a child and the parents of that child commit a violent crime against the person, that those parents are acting out of public duty? But there are even more less serious criminal situations where we often debate the legitimacy or justification of a crime. For instance, a homeless woman stealing food to feed her children, or maybe stealing a coat in the wintertime to keep her kids warm. Is that not a justified crime? Now, you might be quick to argue that no, of course that crime isn't justifiable, because that person instead should not have ever had kids if they weren't capable of taking care of them. But of course, the counter argument to that is, well, what if that wasn't her choice? What if those kids and that choice was forced upon her to take care of those kids? Let's go a little further into whether or not a crime could be justified or whether or not you could ever be right for committing a crime. For example, let's look back a little bit into history and let's point out those instances, those situations where an activity was once illegal or once considered a crime, but no longer is. For example, as many of you have probably known or probably seen on the news at some point in time, many states within the country have legalized the use and possession of marijuana. Even though these states have legalized the use and possession of marijuana, many of them have still kept people in prison for committing the crime of use and possession of marijuana that happened prior to it becoming legal in that state. How is this justifiable? How is this okay that these people are in prison for a crime that is no longer a crime? Let me give you a quick example. In 2021, the state of Virginia legalized possessing marijuana, and additionally, they legalized even growing it. However, at the same time, in that same law where they legalized it, they also made a provision that anybody who was already locked up for possession or crimes related to that drug had to remain in prison. And this has become a highly debated topic over the past couple of years, as in late 2022 and late 2023, the president, your president, Joe Biden, has issued mass pardons to those with low-level federal marijuana convictions. Let's take it back to the crime of theft, though. Whether it be a homeless person stealing food or a single mother stealing a coat to keep her kids warm at night. Can we justify it? How about those videos we've seen online where we see large groups of kids, individuals, breaking into a store, destroying it, taking everything out, and running off? Or maybe it's just an individual casually strolling into a CVS or Walgreens and stealing everything off the shelf and casually walking out, as it may not be justifiable, but at the same time, it's not worth the while of the local police station or the local government officials to proceed with prosecuting those crimes. Does that make it okay? Does that make it justifiable? If no one's willing to stop you or wanting to stop you, does that automatically make it okay? It's up to you to decide. What is a justifiable crime and what isn't a justifiable crime? Look, at the end of the day, many of us, if not all of us, commit small crimes on a regular to daily basis. For example, we constantly commit the crime of speeding, but we always justify it by saying things like, oh, I'm running late, so I have to. But let's say we're standing at that vending machine. We got our $2. We put it in the vending machine. We punch in the code for our bag of chips, and 2 bags of chips fall out at the same time. Is that not stealing? But it's okay. We justify it, and we say, oh, today's my lucky day. Crimes are committed on a daily basis. They happen from minute to minute, even second to second here in this country. Some of them go unknown without anyone ever finding out about them. But does that justify them? No, of course not. But for those crimes that are accounted for, at what point do we look at them from a different perspective, from a non-criminal or non-legal perspective? And when do we start looking at them from a human perspective, a common sense perspective, a situational perspective? Nothing, and I mean nothing, is ever that cut and dry. Nothing is ever just black or white. Nothing is ever just right or wrong. We see things from all different perspectives now. So I ask you one last time, Are crimes ever justifiable? Is it ever okay or right to commit a crime? You already know that, in my opinion, we absolutely, at the very least, need more discourse around whether or not crimes can be justified. But I'd love to know what you think about this. What are your opinions, thoughts, or feelings regarding this topic? Please let me know.